My ex-girlfriend stood in front of the entire HR department, dabbing at fake tears, and read out a written complaint accusing me of harassing her in the supply room. The supply room. I hadn't been within 30 feet of that woman in 4 months. But there she was, Victoria Clark, department head, daughter of the man who owned the building, delivering an Oscar-worthy performance while 2 of her little followers nodded along like woodpeckers, swearing they saw everything. I stood there in my cheap gray suit while 3 years of my life got shredded in under an hour. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just watched the HR director avoid my eyes and slide a termination letter across the table. Effective immediately, she said, for cause. For cause. 2 words that would follow me onto every background check for the rest of my life. Victoria wiped away a tear that didn't exist and gave me a look that was pure ice underneath the performance. And then when nobody else was close enough to hear, she leaned in and whispered the line that I would replay in my head for weeks. Who's going to believe a broke nobody over me? I opened my mouth, closed it, because she was right. That was the worst part. She was completely mathematically right. So, let me back up 10 seconds and tell you exactly how good my morning had been before it detonated. This was supposed to be the best day of my career. Clark Industries had a promotion on the table with my name on it. Senior analyst, a real office, a salary that meant I could finally stop eating instant noodles 4 nights a week. I'd also quietly lined up an offer from a rival firm as leverage. 2 doors open. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like the ground under me was solid. I even wore my good shoes. Then, 20 minutes before the promotion meeting, Victoria filed the complaint. And the machine that I'd bled for, that I'd covered for, that I'd stayed late for while everyone else went home, that machine turned around and ate me alive in the time it takes to microwave a burrito. Here's what you need to understand about Victoria Clark. We dated for 8 months 2 years ago. I ended it. That's the whole crime. I ended it because I caught her running the same warm smile past 3 different men at a company gala and realized I was one of a rotating cast. I walked away quietly. Didn't make a scene. Didn't tell anyone. Victoria does not walk away quietly from anything. Victoria keeps a ledger. And today, the day my life was finally supposed to tilt upward, she cashed it in. The evidence was a masterpiece of garbage. Screenshots of messages I never sent. Timestamps that didn't line up with any calendar I'd ever kept, and 2 witnesses from her own team, Priya and Dan, both of whom owed their positions to her, both of whom would not have walked without her permission. It was flimsy. A first-year law student could have shredded it. But you don't get a first-year law student. You get an HR department that reports to the Clark family and a company owned by the Clark family, adjudicating a complaint from the Clark family's golden daughter. The verdict was decided before I walked in the room. I asked to see the actual messages. Denied to protect the complainant. I asked to bring in the security footage from that day. Footage that would have shown me nowhere near that supply room. Suddenly, the footage had already been overwritten. I asked for a single day to get representation. We don't think that's necessary, the director said, not looking at me. Right. Of course you don't. I want to be honest with you. Because this is the part I'm not proud of. In that room, I froze. 3 years of being the reliable guy, the one who never made trouble, the one who ate every unfair thing with a smile because I needed the paycheck. 3 years of that had trained the fight right out of me. I sat there and I took it. I signed nothing, but I took it. And Victoria watched me take it, and something behind her eyes was actually enjoying it. The rival offer gone by lunch. Turns out terminated for cause pending harassment review travels faster than any glowing recommendation ever could. The rival firm's HR called me personally to rescind. Using the gentle voice people use when they think you might be dangerous. I told them there was no review, that it was fabricated. There was a pause and then the gentle voice got even gentler and I understood that in the story now permanently attached to my name, I was the villain. By 2 o'clock, I was standing on the sidewalk outside a building I'd walked into for 3 years holding a cardboard box with a dead succulent and a coffee mug in it. And I genuinely could not think of a single person on earth who was on my side. Though naturally I called the 2 people who were supposed to be. My Uncle Roger and Aunt Linda took me in when I was 9 after my parents died. I have never once been allowed to forget it. Every kindness came with a receipt attached. Every birthday gift had an invisible line item. In their house, I wasn't a nephew. I was an investment, and they had been waiting a very long time for the investment to pay out. I called them from that sidewalk because I was drowning and they were the only rope I could see. Big mistake. Fired, my Aunt Linda said, and I could hear her already sharpening the knife for harassment. Ethan, my God, do you have any idea what this does to our name? Their name, not my life. Their name, it's fake Aunt Linda. She made it up because that's what they all say. My Uncle Roger cut in on speaker now because of course I was on speaker. There's no smoke without fire. You know how much we spent raising you, feeding you, and this is the return we get dragging us through the mud. There it was, the bill right on schedule. We took you in out of the goodness of our hearts, Linda said, her voice climbing into the register she used when she was about to cry on cue. And you've been nothing but a drain. Your cousin never gave us this kind of trouble. My cousin was 31, unemployed, and had once set fire to a kitchen trying to make toast. But sure, the drain was me. We think it's best, Roger said in the tone of a man reading a verdict he'd rehearsed. If you don't come around for a while until this blows over, if it blows over, and they hung up on me. I stood there holding my dead plant. And I did the math on my life. Fired for a crime I didn't commit. Blacklisted from my industry, disowned by the only family I had, such as they were. $311 in my checking account, rent due in 9 days. I had exactly one thing left that resembled comfort, and it was a hole-in-the-wall diner, 4 blocks from my apartment called Maze. I'd been eating there almost every night for a year because it was cheap and warm, and nobody there ever asked me for anything. So, I went to Maze to have what I was pretty sure would be my last decent meal for a while. And that is where I met the waitress who would take my entire world and flip it upside down. Her name, or the name I knew her by, was Ivy. She'd started at Maze maybe 6 months earlier, quiet, the kind of quiet that other people mistake for shy. She took orders, refilled coffee, wiped down tables, and said maybe 40 words a shift. She had this way of moving through the diner like the noise of it didn't reach her, like she was somewhere much larger and just visiting. I'd noticed her the way you notice good weather, pleasant, unremarkable, not something you examine. I did not at that point have the faintest idea who she actually was. Neither did anyone else at Maze. That was rather the point. But I'll let you in on the secret now because watching everyone else not know it is going to be the best part. The quiet waitress refilling ketchup bottles at Maze Diner was Evelyn Vega, chairwoman of Vega Holdings, the single largest private investment firm in the city with tentacles in real estate, tech, media, and finance so deep that half the old money families in town were on paper her tenants. Clark Industries, the company that had just fired me, owned by Victoria's father, was a mid-tier holding in the Vega portfolio. She literally owned the building I'd been thrown out of, most powerful person in the city. Had spent 6 months wiping down tables in a diner, wearing an apron, letting a broke analyst call her Ivy, and tip her $2 he couldn't spare. Why? We'll get there. It's a good reason. It involves me 10 years ago being an idiot at exactly the right moment. For now, all I knew was that I walked into Maze looking like a man who'd been hit by a bus, sat in my usual corner booth, and put my face in my hands. Ivy set a plate in front of me without my ordering. Steak, eggs, the works, the kind of meal I never let myself buy. When I looked up to tell her I couldn't afford it, she was already walking away. And over her shoulder, she said, flat as still water. It's on the house. You look like the floor. I feel like the floor, I said. The floor doesn't wear shoes that nice, she said, and kept walking. I looked down at my good shoes, my promotion shoes, and for the first time all day, out of absolutely nowhere, I almost laughed. 2 tables over, a regular I recognized, a loud guy named Gus, who thought volume was a personality, decided he had opinions about me. He'd clearly overheard my phone calls because subtlety was not among Gus's gifts. Harassment, huh? Gus said loud enough for the whole diner. Yeah, you got that look. Sneaky type. Quiet ones are always the perverts. I didn't have anything left in the tank to fight him. I just stared at my free steak and waited for the floor to open up. It didn't, but something better did. Ivy walked over to Gus's table, coffee pot in hand, and refilled his cup without being asked. Then, in the same flat, unbothered voice she used for everything, she said, Gus, last month you told the whole room your wife left because you worked too hard. She left because you got caught texting her sister. Everyone here knows. Nobody says anything because it's sad and we're nice. She topped off his cup exactly to the brim. So maybe be careful about which quiet man in this room you decide as the pervert. You might not like the scoreboard. Gus turned a color I would later learn to recognize in much richer, much more powerful men. A spectacular blotchy red curdling toward purple. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He grabbed his hat and left $12 on the table and got out of there like the booth was on fire. I stared at her. She shrugged one shoulder and moved on to the next table like she'd done nothing more dramatic than swat a fly. Here's what I didn't clock in the moment, but would understand later. That was Evelyn Vega, chairwoman of a firm that moved billions, choosing to spend a fraction of her infinite power to defend a broke stranger's dignity in a diner over a cup of drip coffee because someone had spoken to me like I was garbage and she had decided quietly that she would not allow it. At the time, I just thought, wow, the waitress is kind of terrifying. And also, those are the nicest eyes I've ever been afraid of. That's when her phone rang. She stepped into the little alcove by the kitchen to take it, and I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the diner was empty now, and sound carries. I heard her voice change. Not louder, but harder. Cut glass. The voice of someone used to being obeyed. No, she said. Tell the Hendrick board the offer stands until Friday and not 1 hour longer. If they want to renegotiate, they can do it with their competitor, who I also own. A pause. I don't care what he thinks he's worth. Freeze it. Another pause, and then colder. Chairwoman Vega does not repeat herself. Chairwoman Vega. I sat very still, holding a fork full of steak in midair and thought, that's a weird name for a waitress to be throwing around. I assumed she was reading a script, practicing lines. Maybe she did theater. Anything but the truth. Because the truth was too stupid to consider that the woman refilling my water was one of the richest people I would ever be in a room with. She came back, tucked the phone away, and caught me looking. Rough day at the theater, I said, going for a joke, because a joke was the only muscle I had left. Something flickered across her face. Amusement, maybe something like that, she said. How's the steak? Best thing that's happened to me in 8 hours, I said, which given the last 8 hours isn't saying much, but it's an honest steak. She slid into the booth across from me. Just sat down. Waitresses don't do that. I froze like a rabbit. Tell me, she said the harassment thing. Who was she? I don't know why I told her. Maybe because she asked like she already knew the answer and just wanted to see if I'd lie. Maybe because I'd hit the exact bottom where a stranger's ear feels safer than any friend's. I told her all of it. Victoria, the ledger, the fake screenshots, the 2 puppet witnesses, the overwritten footage, the rescinded offer, the family that judged me for my own ruin. She listened without moving. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said her father owns Clark Industries. Yeah, and Clark Industries is owned by, she stopped herself, recalculated. It's a bad company to have on the wrong side of, she finished, which was not what she'd meant to say. I now know what she'd been about to say. It's the only company, I said. You don't fight a family like the Clarks. You just take the hit and hope you're still standing after. She looked at me for a while, and then she said something that I laughed off in the moment and have thought about every day since. What if the hit didn't have to land? Then I'd marry whoever made that happen, I said, raising my coffee mug like a toast to a fantasy on the spot. City Hall. Anyone who could make Victoria Clark's world burn, I'd sign the papers before the ink was dry. It was a joke. It was a broke man's bitter joke on the worst day of his life. Ivy didn't laugh. She looked at me with those terrifying kind eyes. And there was something in them that I would only understand much, much later, something that had been waiting a very, very long time. And she said perfectly calm like she was confirming a lunch order. Okay. I blinked. Okay, what? Okay, she said again. Let's get married. I want to walk you through my thought process in that moment because it was a masterpiece of a man's brain completely short-circuiting. Thought 1, she's joking. Thought 2, she's not joking. Thought 3, I have $311 and no future, and a woman just called my bluff in a way no one has ever called my bluff. And she isn't smiling like it's a game. She's looking at me like it's a decision she made a long time ago and is only now getting around to executing. Thought 4, internal screaming. You don't even know me. I managed. I know you eat here every night and tip $2 you can't afford. She said, I know you covered a Tuesday shift for the busboy last month when his kid was sick and you didn't tell anyone. I know that when Gus called you a pervert, you didn't fight back. Not because you're weak, but because you're tired. She tilted her head. I know enough. People don't just get married, I said weakly. People do it in Vegas after 2 hours, she said. We've known each other for a year. By that math, we're practically ancient history. She stood, untied her apron, and set it on the table. Come on, I have a car. The waitress had a car. The waitress had, it turned out, a black car the length of a small boat with a driver who called her something I didn't catch and opened the door before she reached it. I stood on the curb with my cardboard box and my dead succulent and my whole shattered life. And I made a decision that everyone who has ever met me agrees was insane. I got in the car because here's the truth about hitting the bottom. When you have nothing left to lose, insane starts to look a lot like why not. Victoria had taken everything. My job, my name, my future. My family had judged me and hung up. I was a man with a dead plant and a free steak. If a strange, terrifying, kind-eyed waitress with a car the size of a yacht wanted to marry me and burn down the Clarks, then God help me. I was going to let her try. We drove to City Hall. We got married. With 2 clerks as witnesses and a form that took less time to fill out than my termination letter had. She signed her name in a fast, elegant hand. I read it upside down and it said Evelyn, not Ivy. I figured it was her real first name and Ivy was a nickname the way people do. I did not connect Evelyn the waitress to Chairwoman Vega because why on God's green earth would I? Some part of your brain simply refuses certain conclusions. Mine refused that one for another 3 weeks, which in hindsight makes me the frog at the bottom of the well, cheerfully unaware of the ocean. Afterward, standing on the courthouse steps, legally married to a woman I'd known for a year and understood for 0 minutes, I turned to her and said the only thing I could think of. So what now, wife? The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, a rumor of one. Now, Ivy said, you go home and sleep. You look like the floor, remember? She got in her boat of a car. And tomorrow we start collecting what people owe you. The car pulled away. I stood there on the steps in my promotion shoes, freshly fired, freshly disowned, and freshly absurdly married. And I laughed out loud in the empty afternoon like a crazy person. That night, for the first time in years, I slept like the dead. The next morning, my uncle and aunt showed up at my door. I should have known. Bad news to them was a bloodhound scent and a nephew married to a woman with a car meant only one thing in their arithmetic. Money. Somewhere within 12 hours of my wedding. I never found out how. That family had ears and walls. Roger and Linda had heard that the drain had married up and they had come to remind me that everything I had was by ancient family accounting partially theirs. So this is the thanks we get, Roger said, pushing past me into my tiny apartment without being asked. Linda close behind. You marry some woman, don't even invite family, and I have to hear about it from a neighbor. 12 hours ago, they'd told me not to come around. Now they were in my living room. The whiplash would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. You said not to come around, I reminded them. Until it blows over, if it blows over, direct quote. Don't get smart, Linda snapped. She was already scanning my apartment for anything that looked new, anything that looked expensive, any evidence of the money her nose had picked up. Where is she? This wife of yours, we should meet her. It's only proper. Proper. The woman who'd hung up on me while I stood on a sidewalk holding my career in a box. Wanted to talk about proper. And that's when the knock came at my door for the second time that morning. It was Ivy, still in a plain coat, still looking, to anyone who didn't know better, like exactly what my aunt and uncle assumed she was, a diner waitress who'd somehow bagged a broke ex-analyst. Linda's whole face rearranged itself in real time. The math had come back wrong. She'd smelled money and gotten a waitress, and you could watch the disappointment curdle into contempt. This is her, Linda said, not even lowering her voice. The car, the sudden marriage for this, a waitress. She looked Ivy up and down like she was inspecting produce. Oh, Ethan, you really can't do anything right from a harassment scandal to a diner girl. We came all this way hoping you'd finally married someone useful, someone who could help this family. And instead, there's a debt, by the way, Roger cut in. Because Roger could never let a shakedown breathe. He'd apparently decided that even if the wife was worthless, the visit shouldn't be a total loss. The money we spent raising you, we kept records. $86,000, give or take. With this new situation of yours, we think it's time you started paying it back. Family helps family. $86,000. They de-itemized my childhood and slapped a price tag on it for raising a 9-year-old orphan out of the goodness of their hearts. I opened my mouth to tell them exactly where they could file their invoice. Ivy touched my arm, just lightly, and she stepped forward and she looked at my Uncle Roger with an expression of mild, almost clinical interest. The way a doctor looks at an unusual rash. 86,000, she repeated. You have records. Detailed ones, Roger said, puffing up, mistaking her calm for weakness. Every dollar. Wonderful, Ivy said. I love detailed records. She took out her phone, made one call, turned slightly away, spoke for maybe 40 seconds in a low voice I couldn't fully hear, and hung up. Then she looked at my aunt and uncle and said, "It's handled. The $86,000 has been paid into an account in your names as of about 30 seconds ago. You'll see it within the hour. Consider Ethan's debt to you closed permanently." Silence. Roger laughed. "An ugly little bark." "Sure it has. And I'm the king of his phone." Buzzed. Then Linda's phone buzzed. They looked down at the same moment. I watched two faces drain of color in perfect synchronization, like someone had pulled a plug on both of them. $86,000 had just landed. Real, cleared, instant. For a moment, neither of them could speak. Then Linda, whose greed always ran a half step ahead of her sense, recovered first, not with gratitude. Never with gratitude, but with the reflex of a woman who has just realized there might be more where that came from. "Well," she said, her voice sliding from contempt into oil so fast it gave me whiplash for the second time in 10 minutes. "A waitress with resources. How enterprising. Perhaps we misjudged. Ivy, was it? You know, as family, we should really talk about Ethan's future. There are so many ways we could all know," Ivy said. "Just that. No, we're not family," she continued in the same unbothered tone. "You made that clear yesterday on a sidewalk while he was holding everything he owned in a cardboard box. You judged a grieving 9-year-old for the crime of surviving his parents. I just paid the bill so that he never has to hear your voices asking for money again. That was the whole transaction. It's complete." She opened my apartment door for them. "You can go now." Roger's face did the color thing. Red to blotchy to a sort of stunned gray. He clearly wanted to argue to reassert some authority to remind everyone that he was the elder, the benefactor, the man in charge. But his phone was still warm in his hand with $86,000 that had appeared from nowhere at a waitress's single phone call. And somewhere in his lizard brain, a warning light was blinking that he did not understand but could not ignore. They left. They didn't slam the door. They closed it very, very carefully. The way you back away from something you've realized might be dangerous. I turned to my brand new wife, who had just made the two people who tormented my entire childhood evaporate with less effort than it takes me to order a sandwich. And I said intelligently, "How?" "You have a diner waitress's savings," she said straight-faced. "And a very good relationship with your bank." Ivy, Ethan, that was $86,000 in 30 seconds from a phone call. "I'm frugal," she said. "I don't buy fancy shoes." She glanced at my promotion shoes, still sitting by the door where I'd kicked them off. And there it was again, that rumor of a smile. I should have pushed. Any sane person would have pushed. But I was a man who'd been fired, disowned, and married inside of 24 hours, running on a single free steak. And the strangest luck of my life, and some cowardly hopeful part of me did not want to look too hard at the gift horse in case it turned out to be a mirage. So, I let it go. I let it go for exactly 3 more weeks. At which point the truth would walk into a room full of the most powerful people in the city and introduce itself by making my ex-girlfriend's face turn from red to green in front of 400 witnesses. But that's getting ahead of things, because while I was standing in my kitchen deciding not to ask my wife how she'd conjured $86,000 from thin air across town in a glass office on the top floor of a building I used to work in, Victoria Clark had just heard that the broke nobody she'd destroyed had gone and gotten himself married. And Victoria Clark, who kept a ledger, who never let anything go, who had enjoyed watching me freeze in that HR room a little too much. Victoria was not done with me. She was in fact just getting started, which was a shame for her because so was my wife. I gave it 3 days before I went back to Clark Industries. Not for the job. That door was welded shut. I went back for the shoebox of personal junk still sitting under my old desk. 2 years of photos, a mug my late mother gave me, a lucky pen. Small things, but they were mine, and Victoria had taken enough that wasn't. Ivy insisted on coming. "You don't have to," I said. "It's a hostile building full of people who think I'm a predator. It'll be humiliating." "I like watching people be wrong about things," she said, buckling her seatbelt. Then she reached over and buckled mine like I was a child, and I short-circuited a little. Drive, her driver drove. The lobby security actually flinched when they saw me. Word travels. I signed in as a former employee. Escorted retrieval, which is a special kind of shame. The badge that used to open every door now got me a chaperone and a clipboard. Ivy walked half a step behind me in her plain coat. And every single person we passed made the same silent judgment. Broke disgraced pervert and his sad little waitress wife. I could feel it landing on us like weather. I got to my floor, my old open-plan floor where I'd spent 3 years, and every head turned and the whispering started before the elevator doors even finished opening. And there, holding court by the window with a coffee, was Damian Clark, Victoria's older brother, the heir, the genuine article. If by genuine you mean a man who has never once in his life been told no and has decided this makes him a genius, Damian was what I'd have been if you took me, removed the empathy, added a trust fund, and inflated the ego with a bicycle pump. He wore suits that cost more than my rent and had the particular cruelty of a man who's never had to be clever because money had always done his fighting for him. He saw me, his whole face lit up like Christmas. Well, Damian announced loud to the entire floor because an audience was the only oxygen he breathed. Look what crawled back. The supply room Casanova. A ripple of nervous laughter from people who wanted to keep their jobs. Come back to harass the printer this time. I kept walking toward my old desk. Do not engage. Get the box. Leave. Damian did not want me to leave. Damian wanted a show. He stepped into my path, coffee in hand, and looked past me at Ivy, and his grin got wider and uglier. And this must be the famous wife. The waitress, he said. Waitress, like it was a slur. He looked her up and down, slow, the way a man does when he's decided a woman is beneath him and wants her to feel it. God, buddy, you really do have a type. Aim low, land lower. What'd she rope you in with? Free refills. The floor laughed harder now. Priya and Dan, the puppet witnesses, laughed loudest, performing for their masters. I felt my hands go tight around nothing. 3 years of eating it. 3 years of do not make trouble. And I looked at Ivy standing there while this inflated clown sneered at her. And something in me that had been asleep since that HR room woke all the way up. Say one more word about her, I said, quiet. And find out. The floor went dead silent. Oh. Nobody had ever heard the harassment guy have a spine. Damian laughed, delighted, because a rise was even better than silence. Or what? You'll file a complaint? Oh, wait. He mimed, shooting himself in the foot. That's your move, isn't it? Ruining people with lies. Well, tough luck, Ethan. In this building, we know exactly what you are. Here's the thing. I didn't have a comeback. I had rage and no ammunition, which is the worst combination there is. And Damian knew it. And he was already turning back to his audience to take his bow. Ivy stepped up beside me. She still hadn't raised her voice. She looked at Damian with that clinical mild interest, the doctor and the rash again, and she said, Your name is Damian Clark. In the flesh, Damian puffed. You run the Meridian account? She said, the logistics contract, $200 million a year. Your father's proudest deal. The one you like to tell people you closed personally. She tilted her head. You didn't close it. Your father's CFO closed it and let you sign the last page so you'd stop sulking. Everyone in the executive suite knows they call you the closer in meetings, and it is not a compliment. Damian's grin flickered. How? He started. The Meridian contract renews in 5 weeks. Ivy went on unbothered as if reading a weather report. The renewal is not guaranteed. The client has concerns about, and I'm quoting the internal memo, leadership continuity, and the maturity of the account lead. That's you. You're the concern. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. If that account walks, this floor loses its biggest number, and your father finds out you spent this afternoon doing stand-up comedy instead of protecting it. You could have heard a paperclip drop. Damian's face was doing something now. The red was coming up his neck. Who the hell do you think you are? He breathed. Some diner girl who read a rumor. I think Ivy said that I'm the last person in this building you want to entertain with a joke about my husband. She turned to me completely calm. Get your box. We're done here, and I got my box. The floor parted like water. Nobody laughed now. Nobody could look at us because whatever Ivy was, she just recited. Internal executive suite details that a waitress should not have known in a flat little voice that didn't sound like guessing at all. And every survival instinct in that room had started quietly screaming that something was wrong with the picture, and they couldn't tell what. Damian stood there holding his coffee, red-faced, outmaneuvered by a woman he'd tried to humiliate in front of the exact audience he'd summoned to watch him win. In the elevator down, I stared at my wife. How did you know all that? About Meridian? About the memo? Waitresses hear things, Ivy said, watching the floor numbers descend. Ivy. Ethan, that is not a waitress answer. I contain multitudes, she said, and the elevator doors opened and she walked out into the lobby. I trailed after her like a wordless, angry little poodle who'd forgotten he was angry. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I did the thing I should have done on day one. I sat on my couch with my phone and I started digging. I typed in the details she'd known. Meridian, the renewal. And then, on a hunch that felt insane even as I typed it, I searched the parent company behind Clark Industries, who actually owned the building, who sat above the Clarks in the invisible hierarchy that had crushed me without effort. Vega Holdings. I read about Vega Holdings for 2 hours. Largest private investment firm in the city. Real estate, tech, media, finance. And at the top, a chairwoman almost no one had ever photographed clearly. Famously private, famously ruthless, referred to in one business article as the most powerful person in the city that the city has never actually seen. There were maybe 3 photos of her online, all bad, all from a distance, all half-turned, all deliberately useless. But in one of them, at a charity gala 2 years ago, caught mid-motion as she turned away from a camera she clearly didn't want. There was a woman in a black dress with a particular way of holding her head like the noise of the room didn't reach her. Like she was somewhere much larger and just visiting. I knew that head tilt. I'd watched it refill my coffee 200 times. I set the phone down very slowly and stared at my wall and said out loud to my empty apartment, no, because it was impossible. Because the chairwoman of a firm that moved billions does not spend 6 months wiping tables at Maze's Diner. Because things like that do not happen to men who have $300 and a dead succulent. Because the universe does not work that way. But the universe, it turned out, had been working exactly that way for 6 months, right under my nose in an apron, tipping me back the $2 I couldn't afford by putting free steak in front of me and telling me I look like the floor. I didn't confront her. I want to be honest. I was scared. Not of her exactly, of being wrong, of saying, "Are you secretly a billionaire?" and having her look at me like I'd lost my mind and losing the one good thing that had walked into my burning life. So, I sat on it, frog at the bottom of the well, staring up at what might be an ocean, telling myself it was probably just a big puddle. Meanwhile, and I only pieced this together later, Ivy was busy. The morning after the Meridian humiliation in her real office on the real top floor of the real tower, Evelyn Vega asked her people for one thing. Everything on the harassment complaint filed against one Ethan Reed. It took her team 4 hours. They pulled the overwritten security footage, which had of course not been overwritten at all. Merely locked in a Clark Industries server that Vega Holdings as the parent company had every right to access. The footage showed me on the day of the alleged incident at my desk all day, nowhere near the supply room, airtight. They pulled the message logs. The screenshots Victoria had submitted were fabricated, stitched together from a real conversation 8 months prior and doctored with new timestamps. Sloppy work. The metadata screamed it. And they pulled the thing that mattered most, a chain of texts between Victoria Clark and Dan, puppet witness number 2, in which Victoria, drunk and gloating one night, had spelled the whole thing out. She admitted she'd made it all up, that Dan would swear to whatever she needed, that she wanted me erased for dumping her, and that no one would believe a broke nobody over her. And even if they did, her father owned the building. Ivy read that last line, I'm told, and went very, very quiet. Then she called me and in the calmest voice in the world, she said, tomorrow, wear a real suit, not the harassment shoes. We're going to go get your name back and I want you to be the one who takes it. Me? I said, how am I supposed to? You'll have everything you need, she said. You just have to be brave enough to use it. Can you do that? I thought about the HR room where I'd frozen, where I'd let everything happen to me. Where I'd been so tired and beaten that I sat there and took the worst lie of my life without a fight. Yeah, I said. I can do that. Good, said my wife. Because Dan is the weak link, and tomorrow you're going to break him. Dan, it turned out, was easy. We caught him at the coffee cart across from the Clark building the next morning, where he went every day at 9:15 with the reliability of a man who has no imagination. I sat down across from him at the little metal table, and he nearly choked on his latte. You can't be here, he hissed, looking around like Victoria might materialize. You're not supposed to. Relax, Dan, I said, and I slid my phone across the table, and I let him read the text chain. Victoria's drunk confession, his own name tied to her cruel plans. The whole ugly architecture of the lie he'd sworn to laid out in her own words. I watched Dan's face drain, white as paper. The face of a man who'd bet his integrity on the wrong horse and just watched it collapse at the finish line. Where did you get this? He whispered. Doesn't matter, I said. What matters is this right now. You're an accessory to fabricating evidence and giving a false witness statement. That's not an HR problem, Dan. That's a legal one. You lied under an official complaint. When this comes out, and it's coming out, Victoria has a father who owns a building and a legal team on retainer. What do you have? Dan had nothing. Dan only had a latte and a rapidly clear understanding of his bleak future. But I said, there's a version of tomorrow where you walked in, realized you'd been manipulated, and did the right thing before it went legal. Or you came forward on your own. That version, people forgive. The other version, they prosecute. I took my phone back. You've got until end of day to decide which Dan you want to be. I stood up. I'd rehearsed the exit line in the shower, I'm not ashamed to admit. Oh, and Dan, Priya's going to fold the second she hears you talked. So, if I were you, I'd want to be first. I picked up his coffee, took a sip, made a face. This is terrible. You should really treat yourself better. And I walked away and I did not look back. Internally, I was screaming with pure joy because for the first time since that HR room, I had not frozen. I had walked in with solid proof and walked out holding a man half ready to confess. That was my spine coming back, one vertebra at a time, and I owed the first piece of it to a waitress. That afternoon, Dan went to HR, not the Clark-controlled internal HR, but on specific anonymous burner text advice he didn't question, an external employment attorney. He recanted his statement in writing. He named Victoria directly. He turned over his own copies of her damaging texts to save his skin. And Priya, exactly as predicted, folded within an hour after hearing Dan had abandoned their shared lie. Victoria Clark's airtight daddy owns the building frame job now had 2 of its 3 supporting legs sawed off, and she did not know a single thing about it yet. She found out when the external attorney's letter hit her father's desk. The letter demanded the immediate reversal of my termination, a formal written retraction, and noted in polite, lethal legal language that the fabrication of harassment evidence was being documented for potential further legal action. Old man Clark, father of Victoria and Damien, was no fool like his children. He built the entire company, they only inherited reckless arrogance. He read that letter and understood at once his daughter had acted recklessly and created an expensive mess. His first instinct was not justice. It was damage control. He picked up the phone to erase the problem the way the Clarks always erased problems, by calling someone higher up and pulling a favor. He called up the corporate chain, reached out to parent company Vega Holdings. He expected a regular board executive who would take a small favor, smooth over the minor employment scandal, and protect their valuable mid-tier subsidiary. He hit a wall instead. A very polite assistant informed him the chairwoman was fully aware of the Reed case, that she was personally overseeing the matter, and read the chairwoman's instruction word for word. Clark Industries will resolve this correctly and immediately, or Clark Industries will discover how quickly a mid-tier subsidiary can become a former subsidiary. Old man Clark hung up his phone in his large corner office. For the first time in decades, he felt genuine fear, and he had no clue why the invisible chairwoman of Vega Holdings cared about a fired analyst named Ethan Reed. He never linked it to his daughter's ex-boyfriend's new waitress wife. Why would he? All the clues sat right in front of him, yet no one could piece the full picture, because the truth was far too absurd to believe. That was the whole delicious core of the situation. That night, Ivy came over to my apartment with takeout, the expensive kind. I noticed but said nothing. We sat on my beat-up couch and ate straight from the food boxes. She asked how the whole confrontation had gone, and I recounted every detail with dramatic voices, and she actually laughed. A real laugh, short and low, a surprised sound like laughing was something she'd forgotten how to do. I stared at her, amazed at how the sound softened her whole face. For a second, I forgot to be terrified of the massive ocean of secrets hiding behind her ordinary waitress mask. "You're staring at me," she said, not lifting her eyes from her noodles. "You laughed," I said. "I've known you a full year, and I've never heard you laugh before." She fell quiet for a moment, still focused on her food. "I don't do it much. There hasn't been a lot worth laughing about for a very long time." She finally lifted her gaze to mine. "You're kind of funny when life isn't crushing you flat." "High praise coming from my own wife," I said. "Speaking of that, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Every muscle in her body tensed faintly, and I caught the small shift. The powerful chairwoman was bracing for a question she didn't want to answer, and I chickened out at the last second. God help me. I watched her tense form, saw a flicker of something almost vulnerable cross the most influential face in the city, and I did not ask if she was Evelyn Vega. Instead, I asked something lighter. Do you actually enjoy the food at May's, or was working there just to cover for something bigger? She relaxed a tiny bit, and that faint hint of a smile returned. May's makes genuinely great congee, she said. That part was never a lie. That's the most honest thing you've told me all week, I said. Probably, she agreed and stole a dumpling off my plate. I let her take it. It turns out when a sharp, kind-eyed woman who owns half the city steals your dumpling, you simply let her. You even feel glad about it. I chose not to press the heavy questions I wasn't ready to hear answers to. I would ask eventually, forced by future events, but not tonight. Tonight I had warm noodles and a wife who'd laughed for me once. Across town, Victoria Clark stared at the legal letter slowly dismantling her fabricated harassment accusation piece by piece. She made up her mind, because she kept a ledger and never let any slight slide. Losing to a penniless nobody wounded her ego too deeply to bear, so she planned to escalate everything. She would stop handling this through quiet HR channels and turn it into something personal, public, and massive. She already had a venue picked out 5 weeks away. Her family's biggest yearly event, the Clark Industries Anniversary Gala, with 400 guests filling a gilded ballroom holding all the city's elite business figures. She planned to drag the penniless supposed predator and his diner waitress wife into that crowded room in front of everyone who mattered. She would finish what she'd started, and no waitress or lawyer could stop her. Victoria thought she was laying a trap for me. In truth, she'd hand-delivered a formal invitation to her own public downfall, addressed to the two people fully capable of bringing it. A week before the gala invitations arrived, the Clarks got one more chance to avoid public humiliation, and they seized it eagerly. Some people cannot spot trouble before they step straight into it. It happened at a restaurant called Lumiere, a high-end spot with a 3-month waiting list, a wine book thicker than a phone directory, and prices that made me wince just reading the menu. Ivy brought me there on a Friday night. You've spent your whole life eating like you need to apologize for taking up space, she said. Tonight, you eat like a man who deserves to be chosen. She spoke lightly, but I sensed the sincere feeling beneath her words, and I let her take me out. I was slowly learning to accept good things from her without hesitation. We were halfway through the best meal I'd ever tasted when I heard a familiar laugh. I'd recognized that artificial laugh anywhere, Victoria's performative, bright chuckle meant to make the whole room see how much fun she was having. She sat across the dining room at a large table with Damien and a group of hangers-on who still clung to the Clark name thinking it brought status. The gala was still a week away. My termination had been formally reversed, but public opinion hadn't fully shifted yet. To Victoria, I remained the penniless predator she'd ruined months before. Seeing me dining above my station with my humble waitress wife ruined her mood completely, in the most satisfying way possible. She couldn't walk away without taunting me, of course she couldn't. She walked over holding a wineglass, Damien trailing behind her with their small audience of hangers-on swiveling to watch the drama unfold. She stopped beside our table and looked down at us with the vicious delight of a cruel person handed a helpless target on a silver platter. Ethan, she purred, loud enough for Lumiere's surrounding tables to hear. My goodness, do the staff here know who you are? Do they know what you've been labeled? She raised her voice to carry further to the room. Everyone ought to watch their silverware carefully. We have a documented predator dining tonight. A few nervous chuckles came from her table. The rest of the dining room fell cold and silent. I felt the old flinch kick in, a reflex built over 3 years of swallowing unfair treatment. Then a warm, steady hand settled gently over mine on the table, and the urge to shrink away vanished entirely. The waitress beside me wasn't going to let me shrink alone anymore. Victoria kept pushing her taunts, glancing Ivy up and down with disdain. How sweet. Did he tell you he can't afford a place like this? Are you covering the bill, sweetheart? Is that the arrangement between you two? She leaned in, her tone conspiratorial yet vicious. A little word of advice, girl to girl. He's a con artist. He'll drain you of every dollar you own and abandon you afterward. You'd better leave while your small diner savings are still intact. Miss, a new voice cut in, quiet yet firm. The restaurant's general manager appeared at Victoria's elbow. An elegant, polished older woman who ran Lumiere with gentle but unbreakable authority. Victoria turned toward her with an expectant smile, fully convinced the manager planned to escort us out, the supposed predator and his low-class waitress, the obvious troublemakers in the room. Yes, Victoria said, gesturing toward me and Ivy. Thank you. I was just about to point out the issue here. These two really shouldn't be allowed to stay. Miss, the manager repeated, her voice cold enough to frost glass. I'm going to ask you and your entire party to leave at once. Victoria blinked in total shock. I'm sorry? You are disrupting our paying guests, the manager clarified, her gaze shifting respectfully to Ivy. Specifically, you are disturbing this guest. Then she did something that froze the entire dining room solid. She tilted her head in a small, precise, deeply respectful bow. Chairwoman Vega, the manager said. Her tone softened completely, all frost reserved only for Victoria. I'm truly sorry for this disruption to your evening. It will not happen again. May I send our tasting flight to your table as our complimentary apology? You could have heard a single fork clink against a plate in that silent restaurant. I watched Victoria's mind struggle to process the impossible sentence it had just heard. Chairwoman Vega directed. At the simple waitress the manager bowed to inside a restaurant Victoria thought she could lord over. The puzzle pieces slowly clicked into Victoria's head, far too late. Vega Holdings, Ivy said pleasantly to the whole silent room. They acquired Lumiere and its parent hospitality group last spring. It's a lovely small collection, 4 restaurants, 2 hotels. She smiled at the manager. The tasting flight sounds wonderful, Diane, thank you. And please don't bother apologizing. It's not your job to keep trash off the premises. Sometimes trash wanders in all on its own. She said the word trash while staring straight at Victoria, her tone so sweet and mild the whole room took a full second to register that the city's most powerful woman had openly called a Clark garbage in front of dozens of witnesses. Victoria's face went through its familiar ugly color shift. Triumphant red curdling into confused white, finally settling into a sickly green. Damien behind her turned the shade of a man who'd just mocked the owner of the chair he sat beside. Victoria managed a shaky protest. That can't be right, she's only a waitress, I've seen her working at some shabby little diner. I own that shabby little diner too, Ivy replied. And this restaurant. As it happens, I hold a controlling stake in your family's entire company. Which means in a very real sense, I own the paycheck that bought the dress you're wearing to insult my husband. She lifted her gaze fully, letting Victoria see the sharp edge beneath her pleasant tone. Victoria physically stumbled backward a step. You called him a con artist inside my own restaurant while I sat right here. You have without exaggeration the worst room-reading instincts I have ever met, and I run a firm full of professionals paid to judge people in rooms. She nodded toward the manager. Diane, if you would see them out. Of course, chairwoman. Diane turned to Victoria, and 2 restaurant staff quietly appeared on either side of her, polite yet immovable. This way, please. Your party's tab will be settled, but your group is no longer welcome to dine here again. The exit lies behind you. They escorted Victoria and Damien out the door, the whole restaurant watching every step. Victoria walked rigid-backed and shaking. Damien muttered that this was insane, she couldn't do this to them. It was funny because she absolutely could, and she'd just proven it in front of everyone. At the door, Victoria twisted around to fire one last petty shot, as cruel people always do even when they've lost everything. This isn't over, she hissed across the silent dining room. Do you hear me? This will never be over. It really is, Ivy said without even turning around, spreading butter on a slice of bread. You just haven't caught up to that fact yet. The door shut behind Victoria, and after a beat of stunned silence, the restaurant did something I would never forget. The crowd began to applaud. Quiet at first, then growing louder. A room full of the city's wealthy elite clapped to see an arrogant Clark publicly chased out. I sat there completely stunned, and Ivy handed me the buttered bread as if nothing dramatic had just unfolded. Eat, she said. Diane's tasting flight is genuinely spectacular, and it's coming out hot soon. You own 4 restaurants and 2 hotels, I said. And a diner, she reminded me. Don't leave out the diner, it's my favorite spot, for their congee. Ivy. Ethan. I'm never going to reach the bottom of the list of everything you own, am I? No, she agreed, utterly unbothered. But I find it very charming when you make that confused calculating face trying to figure it all out. She leaned across the table, and since we were seated, there was no seatbelt to buckle for me. Instead, she brushed a stray strand of hair gently behind my ear. A casual, possessive gesture done publicly in front of a restaurant still buzzing with the fallout of Victoria's ejection. For the record, she said, lowering her voice to speak only to me. I didn't bring you here to show off my assets. I brought you here because I saw you flinch the second she started attacking you earlier. I felt that old, tired flinch from the HR room all over again. Her eyes stayed steady, locked on mine. I wanted you to witness firsthand what happens to anyone who speaks to you that way from now on. I needed this to sink fully into your mind. Ethan, you are not the broken man from that HR room anymore. You will never be alone in a room like this again, not as long as I'm alive breathing. I stared at my wife, the quiet diner waitress, the woman who owned this restaurant, that small diner, and half the city's major businesses. Somehow, impossibly, she was mine. Something tight and clenched in my chest, a tension I'd carried since I lost my parents at 9, slowly and quietly unwound at last. It's sinking in, I said slowly. You might have to keep reminding me for the rest of your life, she said. I think I can manage that. That faint hint of a smile tugged at her lips. It's an excellent investment. The returns have been incredible so far. The tasting flight arrived shortly after, and it lived up to every bit of her praise, spectacular in every bite. I ate it as a man who'd been deliberately chosen, seated in a restaurant my wife owned. This was only 1 week before we stepped foot into that gala ballroom and brought the Clark family's entire empire crashing down for good. That grand ballroom and the formal invitation summoning us there is where the real final reckoning unfolded. It all began with a thick cream-colored envelope delivered to my door by courier. The gala invitation arrived via private courier, printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold embossed lettering and the Clark Industries crest stamped prominently. 2 names handwritten across the top in Victoria's sharp, cruel handwriting, Ethan Reed and Guest. Guest? She couldn't even bother writing my wife's actual name on the card. She wants us to come to the gala, I said, flipping the card over to examine the back. Why invite the man she deliberately framed to her family's largest yearly celebration? Because she thinks she's already won, Ivy said, reading the invitation over my shoulder. The legal reversal rattled her, so she's switching battlefields entirely. A courtroom is a space she cannot fully control, but a ballroom is her home turf, filled with people who buy into her self-made narrative. She set the card down flat on my counter. She plans to humiliate us so thoroughly in public that no attorney's letter can repair the damage to our reputations. Public perception always outweighs dry legal facts. It's the oldest Clark tactic there is. So we simply don't go, I said, reacting with the reasonable instinct of any sane person. We go, my wife replied, calm and unshakable, already knowing exactly how the whole evening would end. Ivy, Ethan. She met my eyes, and beneath that steady calm flickered something soft, almost tender. For 3 years that family treated you like a disposable object. Your ex-girlfriend tried to erase your identity entirely. Your aunt and uncle judged and resented you just for surviving your parents' death. You've spent your whole life shrinking small inside rooms owned by cruel people. She reached over to straighten my collar, an oddly domestic gesture from a woman who handled billions in corporate deals every day. I would very much like to take you into their largest venue and watch them fully understand exactly what they threw away. Will you let me do that for you? When she framed it like that, there was no way I could say no. I'll need a proper, high-quality suit. I said it's handled, she said. It'll be at your door tomorrow. The suit that arrived was not a suit. It was armor tailored to the millimeter, a charcoal so deep it drank the light. And it fit me the way nothing had ever fit me. And when I put it on and looked in the mirror, I did not see the frozen man from the HR room. I saw someone who might just possibly walk into a lion's den and not flinch. I texted Ivy a photo, just a mirror shot. Didn't say anything. She texted back one word, ambitious. I didn't know yet that this was the highest compliment she gave. The night of the gala, her car came for me. When I slid in, she was already there, and I forgot how to breathe. I'd only ever seen Ivy in an apron or a plain coat or take out on the couch clothes. Tonight, she wore black, a black dress with a particular clean severity. No glitter, no trying because she didn't need to try and her hair was up. And she looked exactly like the woman in the bad gala photo I'd stared at on my phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. The one who held her head like the noise of the room didn't reach her. The pieces slid 1 inch closer to fitting. I looked at her and my mouth went dry and some part of my brain whispered, you already know. And I told it to shut up. You're staring, she said. I gave up on the sentence. You look like you could buy the building and evict everyone in it. Something flickered in her eyes. Amusement and something else. One thing at a time, she said. Seatbelt, she buckled mine. I let her. The Clark Gala was everything Victoria wanted it to be. Gold and marble and 400 important people drinking champagne and judging each other. We walked in and I felt the room notice us. Felt the whisper ripple out. The pervert. That's the harassment guy. And who's the woman? And for one cold second, the old instinct rose up to make me small. Then Ivy took my arm, and the smallness had nowhere to sit. Victoria found us within minutes. She'd been waiting, of course. She came sweeping across the ballroom and read. Of course, read. The woman had no subtlety. With Damien a half step behind her wearing his stupid closer's grin, and her father, Old Man Clark, trailing with the wary look of a man who'd been getting strange phone calls and didn't like the shape of the evening. Victoria had an audience gathered before she even reached us. She'd made sure of it. This was theater, and she'd sold tickets. Ethan, she said, pitched to Carrie, delighted. Cruel. You actually came and you brought the little waitress. How brave. She looked Ivy up and down. The same inspecting produced look my aunt had used. The family resemblance and contempt. Everyone, this is the man I had to let go for harassment. And this is the diner girl who married him for reasons I genuinely cannot fathom. Isn't it sweet? Two nobodies playing dress up at a real party. The gathered crowd tittered that ugly, nervous society laugh. I invited you here, Victoria continued, warming to it now because I think it's important that everyone see clearly who they're dealing with. Ethan Reed fired for cause. A predator my father's company had to remove to protect its women. She let it land. I wanted witnesses so there could be no more lawyers, no more nasty letters, no more pretending, just the truth in front of everyone who matters in this city. She really thought she was winning. You could see it. The red face flushed with the pleasure of it. The ledger balancing at last. Damon picked up his cue. Honestly, buddy, the classy thing would have been to slink away quietly. But no, you dragged your sad little wife into a room full of actual people to embarrass her, too. That's just cruel. He raised his voice for the cheap seats. Someone should really escort the waitress back to the kitchen before she starts clearing plates on instinct. The laughter got worse. I felt Ivy's hand still resting light on my arm. She hadn't moved, hadn't tensed. She was watching Victoria and Damon perform with that mild clinical interest, the doctor in the rash. And I realized she was letting them go, letting them climb as high as they possibly could, letting them stack their whole reputations in front of the whole city on top of a lie so that when it fell, it would fall from the maximum height. Old Man Clark was the only one not laughing. He was looking at Ivy and something in his face was starting to go wrong. Some slow dawning dread. Because a businessman that sharp doesn't survive decades without developing an instinct for the exact moment the floor stops being solid. Victoria, riding high, went for the finish. So, here's what's going to happen, Ethan. You're going to apologize publicly to me, to my family for what you did, and for having the gall to fight it, and then you and your waitress are going to leave. And you're never going to come near this family or this company again. She smiled. Poison silk. Or I make sure that harassment becomes the only word anyone in this city ever associates with your name. Your choice. The ballroom held its breath, and that was the moment my wife decided the villains had climbed high enough. She didn't say anything at first. She simply lifted her free hand, a small gesture, barely anything. And across the ballroom near the entrance, a set of doors opened. A group of people came in, 6 of them in dark suits, moving with the specific unhurried purpose of people who are never, ever late because the world waits for them. I recognized one. I'd seen his photo that night. Doomcrolling Vega Holdings at 2 a.m., the chief operating officer of the largest private investment firm in the city. The whisper of the ballroom changed key. This was a different sound. Society titter died and something colder took its place because these 6 people were known and their presence at a mid-tier company's anniversary gala made no sense at all unless it made a sense that no one in the room had yet dared to assemble. The 6 crossed the floor. The crowd parted for them without being asked and they walked directly up to us, past Victoria, past Damien, past Old Man Clark, and they stopped in front of my wife and the CEO of Vega Holdings. One of the most powerful men in the city, inclined his head and said, in the clear, carrying voice of a man making an announcement he'd been instructed to make loudly, Chairwoman Vega, everything is prepared per your instructions. We're only waiting on your word. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind you could drown in. 400 of the most important people in the city turned as one organism to look at the woman. In the plain black dress standing on the arm of the man they just spent 10 minutes calling a broke pervert. Victoria's face, which had been a triumphant flushed red, began slowly, then all at once to change color red to white to a sort of sick dawning green like a traffic light having a nervous breakdown. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Damien's champagne glass slipped a full inch through his fingers before he caught it. And I watched the closer's grin die on his face in real time. And Old Man Clark closed his eyes for 1 second, the way a man does when the strange phone calls finally horribly resolve into a single clear picture, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Vega, she's Vega." "Ivy," Victoria managed, tiny, cracked. You're a waitress. You work at a diner. I've seen you." "You, Ivy," Evelyn, Chairwoman Vega, my wife, finally spoke, and her voice was the cut glass voice from the phone call in the diner. The one used to being obeyed, and it filled the enormous room without her raising it at all. "I own the diner," she said. "I own the building the diner is in. I own the block. I own through Vega Holdings a controlling interest in Clark Industries. This company, this gala, the champagne in your hand, and the floor you're standing on." She let each fact land like a stone into still water. "I have owned it for 2 years. I chose to spend 6 months of that time waiting tables at Maze wearing an apron because there was a man who ate there every night who was kinder to a stranger than his own family ever was to him." Her eyes moved just once to me. I wanted to know if he was real. He was. I stood there in my armor of a suit in front of the whole city and understood completely, finally, all at once, exactly who I had married. Frog meat ocean. Victoria was shaking. This is a joke. This is some kind of it's not a joke." "Victoria," Ivy said. "You told my husband that no one would believe a broke nobody over you. You were right about the broke nobody part. You were catastrophically wrong about the nobody." She turned finally to look at the woman who'd framed me. And for the first time all night, there was something genuinely cold in her. Something that made the whole ballroom take an involuntary step back. "You built your entire attack on the belief that Ethan had no one above you to appeal to. That you were the ceiling." A pause. "I am the sky." And then my wife looked at me and her whole face softened. And in front of 400 of the most powerful people in the city, she said the thing that I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. "Go ahead, husband. You spent 3 years frozen in their rooms. This one's yours." She squeezed my arm. "Take your name back." So I did. I turned to face Victoria Clark. And for the first time in the entire miserable arc of this story, I was not the smaller person in the room. "Victoria," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "And I want you to understand how much that meant to me. Let's talk about the supply room." I pulled out my phone. Ivy's people had loaded everything onto it that afternoon. I'd rehearsed nothing because I didn't need to. The truth, when you finally hold it in your hand in a room full of witnesses, gives its own speech. "On the day you claim I harassed you," I said, holding up the screen. "Here's the security footage timestamped. That's me at my desk all day. Nowhere near the supply room. Nowhere near you." I turned so the nearest guests could see. They leaned in. "The footage you told HR had been overwritten. Funny thing about being owned by a parent company. The parent company keeps the servers. Nothing was overwritten. It was hidden by you." Victoria's mouth worked. "That's footage can be faked. Everyone knows." "Great point." I said, "Let's talk about faking since you're the expert. These are the screenshots you submitted as evidence." I swiped. "And these are the original messages. They were cut from 8 months earlier. Completely innocent before you doctored the timestamps. The metadata is right here. Any first year could read it." I looked up at her. "You didn't just lie, Victoria. You did it lazily. You were so sure no one would ever be allowed to check that you didn't even do it well." The crowd was making a sound now, a low, delighted, horrified murmur. Society people love nothing on earth like watching one of their own get skinned in public. "And then there's this," I said, and this was the one that ended her. And I said it slowly. "A text conversation between you and Dan, sent by you. Drunk, I'm guessing, from the typos, where you explained the whole plan, that you made it up, that Dan would swear to anything you needed. That you wanted me erased for the crime of breaking up with you 2 years ago." I read the last line aloud, clear to the entire ballroom. "No one will believe a broke nobody over me. And even if they do, Daddy owns the building." I lowered the phone. "Dan gave that to an attorney 4 days ago," I said. "He recanted his whole statement in writing. So did Priya. Your 2 witnesses are gone, Victoria. Your evidence is gone. All you have left is a room full of people who just heard you plan to destroy an innocent man out of spite because he had the nerve to not want you." Victoria Clark stood in the middle of her family's gala in her red dress in front of the entire business class of the city. And she had nothing. No lie left standing. No father's building to hide behind. The building's real owner was standing right next to me holding my arm. Her face had gone past green now, all the way to a bloodless paper white, and her eyes were darting around the ballroom, looking for a single ally and finding in every direction only the delighted faces of people who had never actually liked her and were thrilled to finally have permission to show it. "Daddy," she whispered, turning to Old Man Clark. "Daddy, do something." But Old Man Clark had done his math. He'd done it the moment the COO said Chairwoman Vega. He was a man who had built an empire and was watching his idiot daughter set fire to it in front of the one person on earth who could reduce it to ash with a phone call. And every survival instinct he had was screaming at him to get as far from Victoria's sinking ship as humanly possible. "Victoria," he said, and his voice was ice, and it was the sound of a father cutting a rope. "Be quiet." She flinched like she'd been struck. Then Old Man Clark turned to my wife, and he did something I did not expect. He inclined his head, not quite a bow, but close. The gesture of a lesser king acknowledging a greater one, and he said, "Chairwoman Vega, I was not aware. Had I known the personal dimension of this matter, I assure you it would never have." "You knew your daughter fabricated a harassment complaint," Ivy said, without heat, which was somehow worse than heat. "Your own HR flagged the inconsistencies, and you told them to process it anyway. I have that email, too, Mr. Clark. You didn't act because you thought the target was a broke nobody with no recourse." She tilted her head. "You were protecting your daughter." "I understand protecting family. It's the only thing I understand better than you do. The difference is that I protect mine by making them worthy of protection. And you protected yours by teaching her that she could destroy anyone beneath her without consequence." A beat. "There are consequences, Mr. Clark. I'm about to introduce your family to several of them." She lifted her hand again. The COO stepped forward. "Effective immediately," Ivy said in the flat announcing voice. "By authority of Vega Holdings controlling interest in Clark Industries, the termination of Ethan Reed is reversed and stricken from all records as fraudulent. A full written retraction will be published in every outlet that carried the original story. Ethan is owed back pay and damages, which the company will pay in full." She wasn't done. "Victoria Clark is terminated from Clark Industries. Effective now for cause, the fabrication of evidence, and false witness. The exact charge she manufactured against my husband applied to the person who actually committed it." The symmetry of it landed on the crowd like a struck bell. "And a full external audit of Clark Industries' executive conduct begins Monday morning. I have a feeling Victoria's complaint won't be the only thing that doesn't survive daylight." Old Man Clark went gray. Damien, who had been standing frozen this whole time with his cracked champagne glass, finally found his voice. And being Damien, he used it to make everything worse. "You can't just this is our company. Our family built this. You can't come in here." And Damien, Ivy said, turning to him with an almost gentle patience. "I own 61% of your family's company. I can do considerably more than this. And after the audit, I suspect I will." She looked at him the way you look at a child who's about to learn something the hard way. "Sit down before you say something that cost your father another 5%. Damien sat down right there on a chair that a waiter, sensing history, slid under him just in time. The ballroom was silent except for the sound of 400 people trying very hard not to be seen enjoying this. And Victoria, standing alone now, abandoned by her father, her brother folding, her witnesses gone. Her lie in ruins, did the thing that people like Victoria always do at the exact bottom. She stopped performing the victim and showed for one raw second what was actually underneath. She lunged at me. Nails out, face contorted, all the poised cruelty gone, just pure animal fury that the broke nobody had one. "You ruined me, you worthless, pathetic." She never reached me. Ivy stepped in front of me. In front of me, her husband shielding me on instinct, and that single motion told me more about who she was than any of the billions ever could, and caught Victoria's wrist mid-swing, and held it. Just held it. Victoria strained against it and couldn't move an inch. And the whole room saw the powerful chairwoman stop the flailing, disgraced Aries with the effortless calm of someone swatting a fly. "You don't touch him," Ivy said quietly. "You never touch him. You framed him. You humiliated him. You tried to erase him from a city he never did anything to deserve losing. And you're going to spend a long time understanding exactly how badly that miscalculation is going to cost you." She released Victoria's wrist and Victoria stumbled back, "But you will not touch him. My husband's dignity is not something garbage gets to put its hands on." She turned her back on Victoria. The ultimate dismissal, treating the woman who'd started all of this as a matter already closed. And she looked at me and the cold chairwoman was gone and my wife was there and she said softly just for me, "You did it. You took your name back. How does it feel?" I looked around the ballroom at Old Man Clark Gray and cornered at Damien literally sitting down and shutting up at Victoria wrecked and abandoned in her red dress at 400 people who had watched me walk in as a pervert and were now watching me stand beside the most powerful woman in the city as her chosen defended husband. "It feels," I said, "like I should have had a wife who owns the sky a lot sooner." And Ivy, Evelyn, laughed, the real one, the short, low, surprised one, in front of everybody. And several members of the city's business class would later swear that the sound of Chairwoman Vega actually laughing was the most shocking thing that happened at the entire gala, and that is saying something. Because a lot happened at that gala. We left. We didn't slink out. We walked out the front, arm in arm, past the wreckage, and the crowd parted for us the way it had parted for the men from Vega. And I finally understood that the parting had never been about power. It had been about her. In the car, I finally said it. The thing I'd been too scared to say for 3 weeks. "You're Evelyn Vega." "I'm Evelyn Vega," she agreed. "You've been Evelyn Vega the whole time in the apron refilling my coffee, letting me tip you $2. "I have excellent savings," she said. "On account of the tips." "Ivy, Ethan, why me?" And there it was, the real question. The one under all the others, the one a man who's been treated like a utility his whole life cannot help but ask. You could have anyone. You could have anything. Why did you put on an apron for 6 months for a broke analyst who tips badly? She was quiet for a while, watching the city lights slide past. "Because 10 years ago," she said finally, "a boy I'd never met gave me everything he had when he had almost nothing and never once asked for anything back. And then walked away before he could even learn my name." She turned to look at me. "I've spent 10 years running an empire, Ethan. I've met thousands of people. Every single one of them wanted something from me. And I never stopped thinking about the one person in my entire life who gave me something and wanted nothing." Her voice was very steady. The way people keep their voice steady when it costs them. "I found you 2 years ago. It took me that long to build the nerve to walk into that diner. And once I did, I couldn't leave. So, I stayed and I waited. And I let you tip me $2 because it was the only thing I'd been given in 10 years that didn't come with a price." I stared at her. 10 years ago," I said slowly. What, boy? What did you don't remember," she said. And there was something almost sad in it and almost fond. "Of course you don't. It was the smallest thing in the world to you." A pause. "It was the whole world to me. But that's a story for another night." She reached over and buckled my seatbelt, which I'd forgotten again because I was too busy having my entire understanding of my life rearranged. "Right now, you've had a very big evening, husband. And you look like the floor again. Let's get you home." "Our home?" I said, because I was brave now, apparently that rumor of a smile. "Getting ambitious," she said, which from her meant yes. "Now, you. Do you think a woman who'd just been unmasked in front of the entire city as the sky she'd mistaken for a ceiling would have the sense to lie low, to take the loss, lick the wounds, disappear for a season? You do not know Victoria Clark. Victoria did not have an off switch. Victoria had a ledger, and the ledger was now catastrophically unbalanced in the wrong direction, and every fiber of her being was incapable of accepting that. She'd walked into that gala the queen and walked out the punchline. And rather than absorb that, her broken pride did what broken pride always does. It doubled down on a losing hand. The morning after the gala, before the coffee was even cold, she launched her counterattack. And I have to hand it to her. It was almost clever. Almost. She went to the press. Not the real press. The real press was already sniffing around the far more interesting story of the invisible chairwoman who'd married an analyst. No, Victoria went to the bottom feeders, a gossip outlet called City Whisper, the kind of place that runs, "You won't believe what happened next" over a stolen photo and calls it journalism. And she fed them a story with a very specific, very poisonous angle. The angle was this. Ethan Reed is a gold digger. I got to read it over Ivy's shoulder the next day, and it was a masterpiece of venom. Exclusive, it screamed. The con man who trapped a billionaire. The story spun it beautifully. That I was a manipulative predator. They leaned hard on the harassment complaint, conveniently omitting that it was fabricated and retracted, that I'd somehow targeted a vulnerable sheltered chairwoman, that I'd worked at a company she owned specifically to engineer a chance encounter, that the whole diner romance was a long con to marry into a fortune. There was a quote from a source close to the family. Victoria obviously describing me as a calculating opportunist who preys on lonely, powerful women. Lonely, powerful women. She was describing Evelyn Vega, the most feared executive in the city, as a lonely woman I tricked. The audacity was almost impressive. She's trying to flip the whole thing, I said, reading it. Make me the villain and you the victim so that even after the gala, people go, well, maybe he did trap her. It's the only move she has left, Ivy said, scrolling through it with the mild interest of a woman reading a menu. She can't win on facts, so she's going for the story. If she can't make you a predator in a courtroom, she'll make you one in the comment section. It's actually the smartest thing she's done. Reputation doesn't need evidence. It just needs repetition. So, what do? Ivy sat down her phone and looked at me. And there was something almost warm in her expression. Something that in anyone else I'd have called excitement. She said. Nothing yet. First, I want to show you something. She stood. Get your coat. We're going to go watch City Whisper have the worst day of its corporate existence. And I'd like you to see it in person because I think you'll enjoy it and because you should know exactly what it looks like when someone comes for you. Now, City Whisper operated out of a converted loft downtown. All exposed brick and standing desks and the smug energy of people who've confused cruelty with cleverness. Ivy's car pulled up outside and she walked in like she owned the place, which I was beginning to learn was a safe default assumption with her about most places. The editor-in-chief, a slick man named Trent, who ran the outlet, came out to meet us with the wary smile of someone who's heard the name Vega and cannot for the life of him figure out why it's in his lobby. Chairwoman Vega. He said, this is an unexpected honor. How can you ran a story this morning? Ivy said, not sitting down, not taking off her coat because this wasn't going to take long enough to sit. The con man who trapped a billionaire about my husband. Trent's smile got oily. Ah, yes. Well, you understand. We have a source. We stand by our reporting. And freedom of the press is your source, as Victoria Clark, Ivy said. A woman who 3 weeks ago fabricated a criminal harassment complaint against my husband, was exposed for it in front of 400 witnesses, was terminated for cause, and is currently under investigation for insider trading. She let that sit. That's your source. A serial fabricator with a personal vendetta and an active fraud file, and you ran her unverified vendetta as an exclusive. The smile was fading. Now, here's what's going to happen, Trent, Ivy continued. And her voice never rose, which is somehow always worse. You're going to retract the story fully. Front page of your site, not buried. You're going to issue a correction stating that the allegations came from a discredited source with a documented history of fabrication. And you're going to name her, and you're going to do it before this afternoon. Trent, to his credit, tried to have a spine for about 4 seconds, and if we don't, we're protected. We have lawyers. You can't just walk in here and I own the building, Ivy said. Trent stopped this building. She clarified pleasantly. Vega Holdings acquired this property in a commercial real estate package 18 months ago. Your lease is with a management company that is a subsidiary of mine. I looked it up on the drive over. She smiled and it did not reach her eyes. I also own a controlling stake in your 2 largest advertisers and a minority position in the media group that distributes your content. I'm not threatening you, Trent. I'm just introducing you to the actual shape of the world you decided to throw a rock in this morning. You didn't attack a broke analyst. You attack me, and I have a great deal more reach than City Whisper. The color was doing the thing now. Trent's face had gone from oily confidence to a sort of grayish dread. The exact shade I was becoming a connoisseur of the retraction, Ivy said. Or we can discuss your lease, your advertisers, and your distribution deal one at a time, slowly over the next quarter. Your choice. But choose in the next 30 seconds because I have lunch. Trent chose the retraction. Of course, he chose the retraction. By 2 that afternoon, City Whisper's front page read, correction and retraction, allegations regarding Ethan Reed. And it named Victoria Clark as a discredited source with a documented history of fabricated claims currently under investigation for fraud. And it stated plainly that there was no evidence whatsoever for anything in the original piece, which had been published in error and against editorial standards. The retraction got 10 times the traffic of the original story. These things always do. And the real press, the outlets that mattered, picked up the retraction and the angle flipped completely. Not analyst traps billionaire, but disgraced Aries caught planting smear against man she already framed once. Victoria hadn't rehabilitated her image. She'd handed the city fresh proof that she was exactly the kind of person who'd fabricate a story because she'd just done it again in public and gotten caught in under a day. I stood in that loft watching the most powerful woman in the city dismantle a media outlet over an insult to me in about 6 minutes without raising her voice or taking off her coat. And I understood something with total clarity. I was never going to be alone in a room again. For 3 years, I'd frozen in rooms. I'd taken hits because I had no one above the person hitting me, no sky to appeal to, nothing but my own tired silence. And now whenever anyone came for me, there was a woman who would walk into their building, a building she'd probably owned, and calmly explain to them the true dimensions of the mistake they'd just made. "You're staring again," Ivy said in the car on the way to lunch. "You destroyed a magazine before lunch," I said. "For me." "I corrected a magazine," she said. "There's a difference. Destroying it would have been if they'd said no." She reached over, buckled my seatbelt, which I'd forgotten again, and I'd do it before breakfast, not just lunch. "Anyone who comes for you is going to have a very educational month. I need you to understand that so you stop flinching when people take shots at you. The flinch made sense when you were alone. You're not alone. Save the flinch for something that deserves it." I looked at my wife, the sky, buckling my seatbelt like I was a kid, and I said, "I love you." And it just fell out unplanned. The first time either of us had said it. Ivy's hands went still on the seatbelt. For a second, the unshakable chairwoman looked, of all things, ambushed. Then she recovered and sat back and looked out the window, and the tips of her ears were red, and she said in a voice that was trying very hard to be normal and not quite making it. "Took you long enough?" "That's not 'I love you too,'" I pointed out. "Don't push your luck, husband. You buckled my seatbelt. You retract magazines for me. You wore an apron for 6 months. I'm just saying the evidence is Ethan. Pretty conclusive from an analyst's perspective. Ethan." She turned and the red ears betrayed her completely, and she flicked my forehead hard. "I married you at City Hall 2 hours after meeting you as anything other than a customer. I think we both know how the evidence reads. Now stop fishing before I make you take the bus." Which from Evelyn Vega meant "I love you too." And we both knew it. And I grinned like an idiot the whole way to lunch. Meanwhile, because I only learned this part later, but it's too good to leave out, Victoria's counterattack collapsing was just the first domino of a very bad week for the Clarks. And the other 2 dominoes were named Damien and Old Man Clark. And they fell in ways that were entirely their own fault. Damon's move was in classic Damien fashion, both aggressive and stupid. Watching his sister smear fail, Damon decided the real problem wasn't that his family had wronged an analyst. The real problem was that Vega Holdings was overreaching, and that the solution was to rally the other Clark Industries stakeholders and clients into a united front against the parent company. He would organize the resistance. He would be the one who stood up to the invisible chairwoman. Finally, a chance to be the closer he always told people he was. He started with the crown jewel, the Meridian account, the $200 million logistics contract. The one he bragged about closing, the one Ivy had known was hanging by a thread. Damon called the Meridian executives personally and pitched them on abandoning any deal touched by Vega, framing himself as the principled Clark heir, protecting them from a predatory corporate raider. There was, of course, one small problem with this plan. The Meridian executives already knew Damon hadn't closed their account. They'd been in the room. They knew the CFO had done the work and let Damien sign the last page to stop him sulking. The exact thing Ivy had recited in the open plan office that made his face go red. So, when the man they privately called the closer as a joke called them up to lead a rebellion, positioning himself as their protector, they did the polite corporate thing. They thanked him for his call, hung up, and immediately phoned Vega Holdings to report that Damon Clark was trying to organize stakeholders against the parent company. Ivy had the Meridian account formally transferred to direct Vega management by end of day, cutting Damien out of it entirely. His last connection to the deal he'd built his whole identity around gone because he tried to weaponize it and reminded everyone he'd never actually held it in the first place. The closer closed nothing, the closer got closed. And Old Man Clark. Old Man Clark made the most desperate move of all and the most human, and the one I almost felt bad about. He tried to call in old favors. He'd spent 40 years building relationships with the other powerful families in the city. The ones with the villas and the board seats and the names that open doors. And in the days after the gala, watching his empire start to crack, he went to them one by one quietly. The way old kings visit each other's courts. He didn't ask them to fight Vega. He wasn't that foolish. He asked them gently to intercede, to have a word, to remind the young chairwoman that there were ways things were done, that the old families looked after each other. That surely this whole matter with the analyst could be smoothed over among gentlemen. And one by one, the old families said no. Not because they liked me, they didn't know me. They said no because every single one of them had at some point in the last 2 years felt the exact weight old man Clark was only now discovering. They all had holdings that touched Vega. They all had deals that needed Vega's blessing. They all knew in the private way powerful people know these things that Evelyn Vega was not a young chairwoman to be managed by a council of elders. She was the tide. And you did not ask the tide to make an exception for your friend. Because the tide remembered who asked. One of them, an old man named Whitfield, who'd known Clark for 30 years, was blunt about it over brandy, and the line made it back to me eventually because good lines always travel. Arthur Whitfield reportedly said, "I've known you a long time, so I'll tell you the truth instead of a comfort. Let your daughter destroy a nobody because you assumed he was a nobody, and it turned out he was married to the one person in this city that all the rest of us quietly answer to. That's not a scandal you can smooth over. That's a lesson the whole city is learning by watching you." He set down his glass. "My advice, stop calling people. Every call you make just reminds one more powerful family that you're the man who picked a fight with the tide and lost. Go home, Arthur. Salvage what you can. And for God's sake, never again assume the quiet man in the corner has no one above you to call." Old man Clark went home. He stopped calling. And that was the whole city closing ranks. Not around me, but around her, confirming with their silence and their turned backs what the gala had announced out loud, that the sky had chosen a husband, and the sky's husband was not to be touched, and any family foolish enough to have already touched him was on its own. Now with the tide coming in, 3 dominoes, Victoria's smear, Damien's rebellion, old man Clark's appeal to the elders, 3 separate, desperate moves by 3 people who could not accept what had happened to them, and all 3 collapsed within a single week. Each one leaving its author more exposed, more isolated, more thoroughly finished than before. I didn't lift a finger for any of it. That's what I kept marveling at. Ivy barely lifted one. A visit to a loft. A phone call about an account, and mostly just the quiet fact of her existence, which made every ally the Clarks reached for pull their hand back. The villains were doing the work themselves. All my wife had done was take away the one thing that had let them get away with cruelty their whole lives. The assumption that no one was watching from above. Turns out someone had been watching the whole time. She'd just been wearing an apron. The audit started Monday, exactly as promised, and it did not go well for the Clarks. Here's what Vegas people found in the first week. Because when the sky decides to look down at you, it sees everything. Victoria hadn't just framed me. Framing me was a hobby. Her actual career, it turned out, was something considerably more felonious. For the past year, Victoria Clark had been feeding confidential Clark Industries data, client lists, contract terms, upcoming bids, to a man named Marcus Hale, a competitor, and as the audit delicately put it, a party with whom Miss Clark maintained an undisclosed personal relationship. Undisclosed personal relationship. She was sleeping with a rival executive and selling him the family company, one secret at a time. The harassment complaint against me suddenly made a lot more sense. I hadn't been erased because I dumped her 2 years ago. I'd been erased because as an analyst, I sat close enough to the data flows to have eventually noticed the leaks. I was a threat she'd removed before I even knew there was something to threaten. The spite was real, but the spite was also convenient cover for getting the one guy out of the building who might have caught her. I'd been fired for being accidentally competent. Somehow, that made it both better and worse. When the audit surfaced the insider trail, old man Clark aged 10 years in an afternoon. Because this wasn't an HR problem or a family embarrassment. This was securities fraud. This was regulators. This was the kind of thing that doesn't get smoothed over with a phone call. Especially when the person who'd normally make that phone call, the parent company, was the one who'd handed the regulators the file. Ivy didn't even have to swing. She just opened the door and let the law walk in. Marcus Hale got picked up first. And Marcus Hale, faced with charges, did what men like Marcus Hale always do. He decided that going down alone was for suckers. And he handed over everything on Victoria to save himself. Every text, every handoff, every dollar. The mistress, who'd been his source, became, in the space of one interview, his plea bargain. Victoria found out she'd been sold out by her own lover the same way she'd found out about everything lately. Too late and in public. I actually saw her once in those weeks. Outside the Clark building, the building she no longer had a badge for. She was arguing with a security guard who wouldn't let her up, wearing sunglasses too big for the overcast day. And she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. For 1 second, our eyes met across the street. I didn't gloat. I want that on the record. I just looked at her. The woman who told me no one would believe a broke nobody who tried to make predator. The only word attached to my name forever. And I felt nothing much. A little pity maybe. The clean, light, nothing of a debt fully paid. She looked away first. Then the money started to go. Vega Holdings as majority owner moved to protect its investment from the fraud liability, which in practice meant carving Clark Industries up and letting the diseased parts die. Bank, seeing the regulatory storm, called in the family's personal credit lines. The Meridian account, Damon's precious $200 million contract. The one Ivy had known about cold in the open plan office that day, walked, citing exactly the leadership instability that was now front-page news. Every domino Ivy had quietly named in that first confrontation fell in order right on schedule. Old man Clark kept the shell of the company barely. Stripped of its best assets, its biggest account and its reputation, it became one of those hollow firms that exists mostly to service its own debt. He held on to his title and lost everything the title used to mean. For a man whose entire identity was being the one who built it, that was its own kind of ruin. Worse maybe than losing it clean, Damien lost more because Damon had less to lose and a bigger mouth. Cut off from the family credit lines he'd treated as a personal faucet. Exposed by the audit as a figurehead who'd never closed a deal in his life, the closer became a punchline. The suits got repossessed. The friends evaporated the way Damon's kind of friends always do. The instant the champagne stops. Last I heard, he was living in a condo his father could no longer really afford, sending furious emails to business contacts who'd stopped answering. Still absolutely certain that none of it was his fault. And then, because the universe has a sense of symmetry, my aunt and uncle came back. They'd heard, of course, they always heard. The whole city had heard by then. The story of the waitress who was secretly the sky had leaked out of that gala and become the thing everyone talked about for a month. My Uncle Roger and Aunt Linda had put the pieces together the way vultures put together the location of something dying. And they showed up at my apartment, my old apartment, which I hadn't fully moved out of yet, with a fruit basket. A fruit basket for the nephew. They'd billed $86,000 and told not to come around. Ethan, Linda beamed, arms open like the sidewalk phone call had never happened. Oh, we are so happy for you. We always knew you'd land on your feet, didn't we, Roger? We always said you said I was a drain, I said. Now, that was a stressful day. You can't hold. You billed me for my childhood, I said. $86,000 itemized for taking in a 9-year-old whose parents had just died. I wasn't angry. That was the thing that surprised me. I'd expected to be angry and instead I was just tired of them. The way you get tired of a smell you've stopped noticing until it's finally gone. And the second you thought there was money, you were at my door. And the second you found out it was just a waitress, you called her produce and shook me down for the debt anyway. Ethan, Roger started. The door opened behind me. Ivy came in. She had a key now, carrying takeout and her plain coat. And for one glorious second, Roger and Linda didn't recognize her out of the black gala dress. And Linda actually opened her mouth to say something dismissive to the waitress. For her brain caught up, and the color drained out of her face. Oh, Linda said faintly. Oh, chairwoman, Mrs., we came to congratulate. You came because you smelled money, Ivy said pleasantly, setting the takeout down. You do it every time. You did it when he got married, and you're doing it now that he's safe. It's almost impressive the consistency. Please, Roger said. And I watched my uncle, the man who lorded his generosity over me for 20 years, actually start to gravel. We're family. Whatever's happened, we're still family, and family there could be a place for us. We could help manage things. We have experience. You have a fruit basket, Ivy said. And a great deal of nerve. She looked at them and it was the gala look, the clinical one, the doctor and the rash. Here is the entire relationship you have with my husband going forward. There isn't one. The $86,000 I paid closed every account between you. You will not call him for money. You will not call him for family. You will not appear at his door with fruit when the wind changes. She opened the door for them. The exact gesture from that first morning come full circle. My husband's time is expensive now. Too expensive to spend on people who only ever saw the price tag and never once saw him. They left. Roger tried to take the fruit basket back on the way out, then thought better of it, then took it anyway. Linda didn't look at me. Small people stay small right to the end. When the door closed, I stood there in the quiet and Ivy watched me. "You okay?" she asked. Softer now, the chairwoman put away. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "You keep doing that, standing in front of me, handling them so I don't have to." "You handled Dan," she said. "You handled Victoria in front of 400 people with your own hands." I only opened the doors. She came over and in that oddly domestic way straightened my collar that didn't need straightening. "You're not the man who froze in that room anymore, Ethan. You haven't been for weeks. I just gave you a place to stand where being brave was allowed." I looked at her, my wife, the sky, the waitress, the woman who'd worn an apron for 6 months for a stranger's kindness. And I finally worked up the nerve to ask the question I'd been carrying since the car. "Tell me about 10 years ago," I said. "The boy, what I did. I need to know the thing that made you do all of this." Ivy went still. Then she nodded slowly and sat down on my terrible couch and patted the cushion beside her. "Okay," she said. "Sit. It's time you knew who you were to me before you were anyone to yourself." So I sat and she told me 10 years ago. Ivy said I was 18 and I had nothing and I was standing in the rain outside a bus station with a suitcase that held everything I owned in the world. I stayed quiet. This was the story. I wasn't going to interrupt the story. My family had just fallen apart. She said, "Not the way yours did. No accident, nothing clean. My father made a bad bet. A business partner betrayed him. And in the space of 1 year, we went from comfortable to bankrupt to gone. My father couldn't survive the shame of it. My mother left. And I was 18, alone with a suitcase and a bus ticket to a city where I knew exactly no one. Because staying where everyone had watched us fall was worse than starting over as a stranger." The most powerful woman in the city said this in the flat, steady voice she used for the things that cost her the most. "My wallet got stolen at that bus station," she went on. "Everything, my last cash, my ID, the little I had left. And I stood there in the rain, and I understood in a very clear and quiet way that I had reached the actual bottom. No money, no family, no name, no plan, just rain and a suitcase and a city that didn't know I existed." She looked at her hands. "I'm not going to tell you what I was thinking about doing standing there. But it wasn't good. I'd run out of reasons. I felt something cold move through me because I remembered a bus station 10 years ago. I remembered rain." And then, Ivy said, and her voice changed. Got younger somehow, the way people's voices do when they reach the memory that saved them. A boy sat down next to me, soaking wet, cheap jacket, maybe 18 himself. He didn't hit on me. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat there for a while. And then he said, "You've got the look I had last month." And he reached into his pocket and pulled out everything he had. Not some of it, all of it. Crumpled bills, some coins, maybe $40. And he put it in my hand and closed my fingers around it and said, "It's not much," I said. Because I remembered, because it hit me all at once. 10 years collapsing into a single second. It's not much, but it got me through last month. Get yourself somewhere warm and figure it out tomorrow. Everybody deserves a tomorrow. Ivy stopped breathing for a second. "You remember?" "I remember the girl in the rain," I said, and my voice was not steady at all now. I forgot her face. I forgot everything about that year. Mostly, it was the worst year of my life. My aunt and uncle had just it doesn't matter. But I remembered giving somebody my last $40 at a bus station and thinking it was the only good thing I'd done in months. I stared at her. "That was you. That was you." "That was me," she whispered. "You gave a stranger everything you had and told her she deserved a tomorrow. And then your bus came and you got on it and you never even asked my name. You didn't want anything. You didn't want to be thanked. You didn't want my number. You didn't want to be a hero. You just decided a drowning girl deserved a tomorrow and you paid for it out of pocket and you left." Her eyes were bright. "Do you know what $40 is when you have nothing? It's a hostel bed. It's a hot meal. It's one night out of the rain. It's the space to make it to tomorrow. A breath. You bought me my tomorrow, Ethan. And I used it. I got the bed and the meal in the morning after and I decided that if a broke stranger could reach the bottom and still give everything he had to someone worse off, then I could get up too. So I got up. And you built an empire," I said faintly. And I built an empire, she said. It took 10 years. And the whole time in the back of everything, there was a boy at a bus station who never told me his name. I couldn't find you. I had nothing to search with. No name, no face I could hold on to clearly. I looked for years. Quietly, I looked. She laughed, wet and unsteady. And then 2 years ago, one of my analysts flagged a due diligence file for a mid-tier holding. And there was a name and a photo attached to a junior employee. And I looked at it and I knew. I don't know how. I just knew it was you. The boy from the rain, all grown up, working 3 floors down in a company I happen to own. Tipping a diner $2 he couldn't spare, being kind to strangers and getting nothing back. Still, after everything. Still. So, you put on an apron, I said. So, I put on an apron, she agreed. Because I had to know if the boy in the rain was real. Or if I'd built 10 years on a memory I'd polished into something that never existed. I could have just walked up to you as Evelyn Vega and handed you a check and called it even. You wouldn't have been real to me then, and I wouldn't have been real to you. I'd have been a story with a bank account. She wiped her eyes briskly, annoyed at them. So, I waited tables and I watched you cover shifts for the busboy and tip badly and eat alone and be gentle to people who were rude to you. And I watched your terrible family and your terrible ex chip away at you and I fell. She stopped, started again, steadier. I fell in love with the grown-up version of the boy who bought me a tomorrow. And then Victoria tried to erase you and you sat in my diner looking like the floor and made a bitter joke about marrying anyone who'd burn her world down. That rumor of a smile through the tears. And I thought, finally, I get to give the boy from the rain his tomorrow back. All of them. Every tomorrow he ever gave away. I did not have words. There are moments a man doesn't have words for. And this was the one my whole ridiculous life had been walking toward. So, I didn't use words. I pulled my wife into my arms, the sky, the waitress, the girl from the rain, and I held her on my terrible couch while the takeout got cold. And for the first time since I was 9 years old and orphaned, I understood what it felt like to be chosen for exactly who I was. Wanted for nothing but myself, valued past any price tag anyone had ever tried to hang on me. You didn't have to marry me to pay me back, I said into her hair. The $40? You could have just, Ethan, she said, pulling back to look at me, exasperated and fond. I did not marry you to pay you back for $40. I married you because I spent 6 months falling in love with you in an apron, and you're funny and kind, and you look like the floor, and I wanted to be the person who picked you up. She flicked my forehead hard. Don't turn the best decision I ever made into a transaction. You of all people should know the difference between a gift and a bill. Right? I said, rubbing my forehead. Sorry, gift, not a bill. Gift, she confirmed. The only one I ever got that didn't come with a price given back with interest to the person who gave it. She settled back against me. Now the takeout's ruined, and I own a controlling interest in 4 restaurants within delivery range. So, I'm going to order all of them and we're going to sit here and you're going to tell me every single thing about the last 10 years I missed. Starting with the bus. So, I did. And that honestly could have been the ending. The boy and the girl from the rain on a terrible couch. 10 years and 1 empire later. Finally, even not on the money, but on the thing the money was always standing in for. But the villains weren't quite done rotting yet. And a story like this owes you the sight of them hitting the actual bottom. So, let me close the ledger properly because it turns out that when you strip cruel people of the power that held them together, they don't band together. They eat each other. Victoria went first and hardest. The insider trading case was airtight. Marcus Hale had made sure of that, buying his own reduced sentence with every text she'd ever sent him. She was charged and in the weeks before the trial. Broke, disgraced, out on bail and radioactive to everyone who'd ever pretended to be her friend. Victoria did the only thing left in her playbook. She tried to run to the men who were supposed to protect her. She went to Marcus first, the lover she'd risked everything for. Marcus, who'd already sold her to save himself, wouldn't take her calls. When she showed up at his building, his own security, some of them the same men who'd once waved her up with a smile, turned her away at the door. The exact humiliation she'd tried to inflict on me at the Clark building served back to her cold. She stood on the street in her 2 big sunglasses and screamed his name at a window that never opened. Then she went to her brother, and Damien, bitter, broke, blaming everyone but himself, looked at his sister, who'd blown up the family company with her affair, and he said the thing that ended them as siblings. I heard about it third hand, but the line traveled because it was too perfect not to. Why would I help you? Damien told her, "You did this. You and you're sneaking around. I had a $200 million account and a name, and you traded it all for a boyfriend who dumped you the second the handcuffs came out." And then, because Damon could never resist the killing twist, even when it was aimed at his own blood, "Who's going to believe a broke nobody like you now?" Her own words, the exact ones she'd whispered to me in that HR room. "Who's going to believe a broke nobody?" Handed back to her by her own brother on her worst day as he closed a door in her face. The ledger, it turns out, balances whether you want it to or not. Victoria was convicted. Not a long sentence. White collar rarely is, but long enough and public enough that the name Clark stopped opening doors in this city and started closing them. She'll be out eventually. She'll have the record and the story and the memory of a ballroom full of people who watched her fall forever. Some prisons you carry with you after they let you go. Damien lost the condo his father couldn't afford. Last anyone heard, he'd left the city entirely. Went somewhere no one knew the Clark name to start over. Still certain that his ruin was a conspiracy of jealous people and not the natural consequence of never once in his life being told no. Men like Damien don't learn. They just relocate their delusion. Old man Clark kept his hollow company and his hollow title, and I'm told sits in his big corner office most days doing very little. A king of ashes, wondering how a lifetime of building came apart in a single season. He never did understand it. Not really. He kept looking for the enemy who'd done it to him. He never once looked in the mirror or at his children or at the broke analyst he'd let his daughter destroy because he assumed a nobody had no sky to appeal to. And my aunt and uncle, they faded. The way small, greedy people fade when there's finally permanently no money to be squeezed. No more fruit baskets came. No more calls. The $86,000 Ivy paid was the last transaction of our entire relationship, and it bought me the one thing I'd wanted from them since I was 9. Silence. A clean, permanent, blessed absence. I didn't destroy any of them. That's the part one keep coming back to. Ivy didn't either. Not really. She just opened the doors and let the truth and the law and their own rotten natures do the work. The villains in my story destroyed themselves. They always had. All the power in the world had ever done was hide it. There's a smaller moment from around then that I think about more than any of the big ones. More than the gala, more than the restaurant, more than the bus station even. It was the day I moved in. Ivy had a home. Of course she had a home. She had several, one of which was a penthouse I'd been afraid to touch anything in the first time I visited. All glass and clean lines and a view of the whole city she quietly owned pieces of. She'd been telling me for weeks to move in, and I'd been finding reasons not to. And finally, she stopped asking and just showed up at my apartment on a Saturday with 3 of her staff and a stack of empty boxes and the flat announcing voice. "We're doing it today," she said. "You've been treating my home like a hotel you're visiting. I'd like you to treat it like the place you live because it is. Because I'd like it to be." She looked around my sad little apartment. "Also, this place has a smell. I've been too polite to mention it. It's the carpet, I think, or possibly the succulent." "The succulent is dead," I pointed out. "It's been dead since the day I got fired." "Kept it." She looked at the dead succulent, then at me. "Why on earth would you keep a dead plant?" And I don't fully know why I told her the truth instead of a joke, except that I'd stopped being able to lie to her somewhere around the gala. "Because it was on my desk the day everything fell apart," I said. "And I carried it out in that cardboard box, and I walked into your diner with it, and you gave me a free steak and told me I looked like the floor. It's the dumbest thing I own. But it was there for the worst day of my life, which turned out to be the best day of my life, and I couldn't throw it out." I shrugged, embarrassed. "It's stupid." Ivy was quiet for a second. Then she picked up the dead succulent very carefully, and she handed it to one of her staff and said, "This one comes with us. It goes on the windowsill in the kitchen. Don't let anyone throw it out." And when the staffer looked understandably confused about why the chairwoman was preserving a corpse of a plant, she added, "It's a founding artifact. Every empire has one." That's when I knew all the way down that I'd married someone who understood me. We packed up my whole life in an afternoon. It didn't take long. A broke man doesn't accumulate much. And most of it, the terrible couch aside, which I fought for and won, and which now sits incongruously in a penthouse worth more than some towns. Most of it we gave away because I was done carrying the artifacts of a life spent apologizing for existing. That night, the first night, we sat on the terrible couch in the enormous glass home, eating she'd made herself in a kitchen that had probably never held a pot of congee before. The dead succulent on the windowsill catching the last of the light. "Can I ask you something?" I said without you deflecting into a joke about how much you own. "You can ask," she said. I make no promises about the deflecting. It's a reflex. 10 years of not letting anyone close. "Were you lonely?" I asked. That's what Victoria's stupid smear said, that I preyed on a lonely, powerful woman. And I know it was garbage. I know she was trying to hurt us, but it stuck in my head because I realized I didn't actually know the answer. "Were you? All those years, all that power, no one to give you anything that wasn't a bill." Ivy didn't joke. She looked into her kanji for a long moment and then she said, "Yes, completely. In the specific way that only happens when everyone in your life wants something from you, so you can never tell which of them, if any, would want you with the wanting removed." She set the bowl down. "That's why the boy at the bus station never left my head, Ethan. Not because of the $40, because he was the only person in my entire life who gave me something and made it impossible for me to owe him anything back. He got on a bus. He erased himself from the transaction on purpose. For 10 years, he was my only proof that a person could just be kind with nothing underneath it." Her eyes came up to mine and then I found him and I put on an apron to make sure the proof was real, and it was. And I stopped being lonely somewhere around the second month of watching you tip badly and cover shifts for the busboy. So yes, I was lonely. Was past tense. You fixed it before you even knew you were doing it. You've been fixing it for 10 years. I didn't have a joke for that either. We were both bad at jokes when it mattered, it turned out. So, I just put my arm around my wife, the sky, the girl from the rain. And we sat on the terrible couch in the beautiful home and ate kanji and watched the city go dark. And neither of us said anything because we didn't need to. Because for the first time in either of our lives, there was nothing owed and nothing owing. Just two people who'd hit the same bottom 10 years apart and climbed all the way up to the same couch. As for me, I did go back to work, not at Clark. God, no. Ivy offered me a position at Vega, and I turned it down. And she raised an eyebrow and asked why. And I said, because the last thing I want is to be the chairwoman's husband who got handed a job. I spent my whole life being valued for the wrong reasons. I'd like to earn one for the right ones. And she looked at me for a long moment and said, ambitious. And it was the proudest I've ever made anyone. So, I took an analyst job at a firm that had never heard of the harassment story. On my own room, on my own merit, and I was good at it. Because I'd always been good at it. That was the whole reason Victoria had needed me gone. Within a year, I was running a team. Not because I married the sky. Because I was finally standing in a room where being good was allowed to count. Ivy kept the apron, by the way. It hangs in the closet of the home we share now. A real home. Not a villa with a number. Just a good home with a terrible couch we refused to replace because it's the couch where she told me about the rain. Sometimes on quiet Sundays, she still puts the apron on and makes because Maze does an excellent kanji. And that part was never a lie. And she learned the recipe and she makes it for me. And I tip her $2 every single time. She keeps the $2 in a jar. She says it's her favorite investment. She says the return has been extraordinary. People ask me sometimes now that the story's gotten around, how does it feel marrying into all that money, all that power, going from a fired nobody to the husband of the most powerful woman in the city? And they always look disappointed when I tell them the truth, which is that the money was never the point and never will be. I lost a family that only ever saw my price tag. I lost a job I bled for and a name I had to fight to get back. I stood frozen in a room while a woman erased me because I'd been taught my whole life that people like me don't get to fight back. And then a girl I gave $40 to in the rain 10 years ago put on an apron and waited and chose me. Not for what I could do for her. Not for my use. Not for anything but the person I actually was on my worst day. Being kind to a stranger with nothing left to give. I lost the family I never really had. I told her once on the terrible couch, the $2 jar on the shelf and the rain coming down outside the way it had. The night we both hit the bottom years and a whole lifetime ago. The uncle, the aunt, the whole machine of people who only ever wanted the price of me. And what did you get instead? She asked, already knowing, just wanting to hear me say it. Pulled her close. The only family I ever actually had, I said. You. Outside it kept raining. Inside it was warm and there was kanji on the stove and the sky was sitting next to me on a terrible couch. And neither of us was ever going to be at the bottom again. Everybody deserves a tomorrow. It just took me 10 years to find out I'd bought my